School 32 here, Megan here, and this is gonna be, let's see what weekend this is gonna go up on. It's gonna be the weekend of the 22nd and 23rd of these two next videos, like this one and one after that. Ignore my hair. I've been home from work today because I was sick. I was up at 2 o'clock this morning, dry heaving and having issues with bowel movement, and then I got up at 8 o'clock, thought I was fine, was going to get up and do some laundry to help my mom out before I go to work and get ready for work and all that, and if I got up and do anything, I was sick to my stomach again and was back in the bathroom. So, yeah, I was like, I'm going to go in. I was all upset about it because I hate missing work, and I only miss work 1 to 2 times a year max that I'm sick. And I really miss other than that. Last December was the first time I missed it other than being sick. So, because of family Christmas type of thing. Anyway, so today's reading is reading again of Holes by Sachar. And we're in chapter 30, starting with chapter 36 today. Chapter 36. They put 4 of the unbroken jars in the burlap sack in case they might be able to use them. Stanley carried the sack. Zero held the shovel. I should warn you, Stanley said. I'm not exactly the luckiest guy in the world. Zero wasn't worried. When you spend your whole life living in a hole, he said, the only way you can go is up. They gave each other the thumbs up sign, then headed out. It was the hardest part of the day. Stanley's empty canteen was still strapped around his neck. He fought back to the water truck and wished he'd at least stopped and filled his canteen before running off. They hadn't gone very far before Zero had another attack. He clutched his stomach as he let himself fall to the ground. Stanley could only wait for it to pass. This bullish had saved Zero's life, but it was now destroying him from the inside. He wondered how long it would be before he had too felt the effects. He looked at Big Thumb and didn't seem any closer than when they first started out. Zero took a deep breath and managed to sit up. Can you walk? Stanley asked him. Just give me a sec, Zero said. He took another deep breath and then, using the shovel, pulled himself back to his feet. He gave Stanley the thumbs up sign and they continued. Sometimes Stanley would try to go for a long while without looking at Big Thumb. He didn't make a mental snapshot of how it looked. He'd make a mental snapshot of how it looked and then waited maybe 10 minutes before looking at it again to see if it seemed closer. It never did. It was like chasing the moon. And if they ever reached it, then they'd still have to climb it. I wonder who she was, said Zero. Who? Mary Lou, said Zero. Hang on just a second, my page just got stuck. Okay. Mary Lou, said Zero. Stanley smiled. I guess she was once a real person on a real lake. It's hard to imagine. I bet she was pretty, said Zero. Somebody must have loved her a lot to name a boat after her. Yes, said Stanley. I bet she looked great in a bathing suit, sitting in the boat while her boyfriend rolled. Zero used the shovel as a third leg. 2 legs were enough to keep him up. 2 legs weren't enough to keep him up. I got to stop and rest, he said, while After a while, Stanley looked at Big Mom. It still didn't look any closer. "I want an ice cream sundae," said Zero, "with nuts and whipped cream and bananas and hot fudge." The sun was almost directly in front of them. The thumb pointed up toward it. They came up to the end of the lake. Huge white stone cliffs rose up before them. Unlike the eastern shore where Camp Green Lake was stated, the western shore did not slope down gradually. It was as if they had been walking across the flat bottom of a giant frying pan, and now they had to somehow climb up out of it. They could no longer see Big Foam. The cliffs blocked their view. The cliffs also blocked out the sun. Zero grunted and clutched his stomach, but he remained standing. "I'm all right," he whispered. Stanley saw a rut about a foot wide and 6 inches deep, running down a cliff. On either side of the rut were a series of ledges. "Let's try there," he said. It looked to be about a 50-foot climb straight up. Stanley still managed to hold the sack of jars in his left hand as he slowly moved up from ledge to ledge, crisscrossing the rut. At times he had to use the side of the rut for support in order to make it to the next ledge. Zero stayed with him somehow. His frail body trembled terribly as he climbed the stone wall. Some of the ledges were wide enough to sit on. Others stuck out no more than a few inches, just enough for a quick step. Stanley stopped about 2/3 of the way up on a fairly wide ledge. Zero came up alongside him. "You okay?" asked Stanley. Hang on just a second. Okay. Zero gave the thumb up sign. Stanley did the same. He looked above him. He wasn't sure how he'd get to the next ledge. It was 3 or 4 feet above his head, and he didn't see any footholds. He was afraid to look down. "Give me a boost," said Zero. "Then I'll pull you up with the shovel." "You won't be able to pull me up," said Stanley. "Yes, I will," said Zero. Stanley cupped his hands together, and Zero stepped on his inner wolf fingers. He was able to lift Zero high enough for him to grab the protruding slab of rock. Stanley continued to help him from below as Zero pulled himself onto the ledge. While Zero was getting himself situated, get himself sustained up there, Stanley attached the sack to the shovel by poking a hole through the burlap. He held it up to Zero. Zero first grabbed a hold of the sack and then the shovel. He set the shovel so that half of the blade was supported by the rock slab. Then the wooden shaft hung down towards Stanley. "Okay," he said. Stanley doubted this would work. It was one thing for him to lift Zero, who was half his weight. It was quite another for Zero to try to pull him up. Stanley grabbed a hold of the shovel as he climbed up the rock wall, using the sides of the rut to help support him. His hands moved one over the other up the shaft of the shovel. He felt Zero's hand clasp his wrist. He let go of the shaft with one hand and grabbed the top of the ledge. He gathered his strength and for a brief second seemed to drift gravity as he took a quick step up the wall and, with Zero's help, pulled himself the rest of the way over the ledge. He caught his breath. There was no way he could have done that a few months ago. He noticed a large spot of blood on his wrist. It took him a moment to realize that it was Zero's blood. Zero had deep gashes in both hands. He had held on to the metal blade of the shovel, keeping it in place as Stanley climbed. Zero brought his hands to his mouth and sucked up his blood. One of the glass jars had broken in the sack. They decided to save the pieces. They might need to make enough or something. They rested briefly, then continued on up. It was a fairly easy climb the rest of the way. When they reached flat ground, Stanley looked up to see the sun, a fairly ball balancing on top of Big Thumb. God was twirling a basketball. Soon they were walking in the long, thin shadow of the thumb. Give me a second. Pages are stuck here. Chapter 37. We're almost there, Stanley. He could see the base of the mountain. Now that they really were almost there, it scared him. Big Thumb was his only hope. If there was no water, no refuge, then they'd have nothing, not even hope. There was no exact place where the flat land stopped and the mountains began. The ground got steeper and steeper, and then there was no doubt that they were heading up the mountain. Stanley could no longer see Big Thumb. The slope of the mountain was in the way. It became too steep to go straight up. Instead, they zigzagged back and forth, increasing their altitude by small increments every time they changed directions. Patches of weeds dotted the mountainside. They walked from one patch to another, using the weeds as footholds. As they got higher, the weeds got thicker. Many had thorns, and they had to be careful walking through them. Stanley would have liked to stop and rest, but he was afraid they'd never get started again. As long as Zero could keep going, he could keep going too. Besides, he knew they didn't have much daylight left. As the sky darkened, bugs began appearing above the weed patches. A swarm of gnats hovered around them, attached by their sweat. Neither Stanley nor Zero had the strength to try to swat at them. How are you doing, Stanley asked. Zero pointed thumbs up. Then he said, if an ant lands on me, it will knock me over. Stanley gave him some more words. Bugs, he spelled. Hang on. Stanley gave him some more words. B-U-G-S, he spelled. Zero concentrated hard and then said, boobs. Stanley laughed. A wide smile spread across Zero's sick and weary face as well. Bugs, he said. Good, said Stanley. Remember, it's a short U if there's no E at the end. Okay. Here's a hard one. How about Lunch? Suddenly Zero made a horrible retching noise as he doubled over and grabbed his stomach. He, his frail body shook violently and he threw up, emptying his stomach of the foolish. He leaned on his knees and took several deep breaths. Then he straightened up and continued going. The swarm of gnats stayed behind, preferring the contents of Zero's stomach to the sweat on the boys' faces. Stanley didn't give him any more words, thinking that he needed to save his strength. But about 10 or 15 minutes later, Zero said lunch. Lunch. As they climbed higher, the patches of weeds grew thicker, and they had to be careful not to get their feet tangled in thorny vines. Stanley suddenly realized something. There hadn't been any weeds on the lake. Weeds and bugs, he said. There's got to be water around somewhere. We must be getting close. A wide clown-like smile spread across Zero's face. He flashed the thumbs up sign, then fell. He didn't get up. Stanley bent over him. Come on, Zero, he urged. We're getting close. Come on, Hector. Weeds and bugs, weeds and bugs. Stanley shook him. I've already ordered your hot fudge sundae, he said. They're making it right now. Zero said nothing. Chapter 38. Stanley took hold of Zero's forearms and pulled him straight up. Then he stooped down and let Zero fall over his right shoulder. He stood up, lifting Zero's worn-out body off the ground. He left the shovel and stack of jars behind as he continued up the mountain. Zero's leg dangled in front of him. Stanley couldn't see his feet, which made it difficult to walk through the tangled patches of weeds and vines. He concentrated on one step at a time, carefully raising and setting down each foot. He thought only about each step, and not the impossible task that lay before him. Higher and higher he climbed. His strength came from somewhere deep inside himself, and also seemed to come from the outside as well. After focusing on Big Thumb for so long, it was as if the rock had absorbed his energy and now acted like a kind of giant magnet pulling him toward it. After a while, he became aware of a foul odor. At first, he thought it came from Zero, but it seemed to be in the air, hanging heavy all around him. He also noticed that the ground wasn't as steep anymore. As the ground flattened, a huge stone pierce rose up ahead of him, just barely visible in the moonlight. It seemed to grow bigger with each step he took. It no longer resembled a thumb, and he knew he'd never be able to climb it. Around him, the smell became stronger. It was the bitter smell of despair. Even if he could somehow climb Big Thumb, he knew he wouldn't find water. How could there be water at the top of a giant rock? The weeds and bugs survived only by an occasional rainstorm. like the one he had seen from camp. Still, he continued toward it. If nothing else, he wanted to at least reach the phone. He never made it. His feet collapsed out from under him. Zero's head knocked against the back of his shoulder as he fell and tumbled into a small muddy gully. As he lay face down in the muddy ditch, he didn't know if he'd ever get up again. He didn't know if he'd even try. Had he come all this way just to, you need water to make mud. He crawled along the gully in a direction that seemed the muddiest. The ground became gloppier. The mud splashed up as he slapped the ground. Using both hands, he dug a hole in the soggy soil. It was too dark to see, but he thought he could feel a tiny pool of water at the bottom of his hole. He stuck his head in the hole and licked the dirt. He dug deeper as he did so. More water seemed to fill the hole. He couldn't see it, but he could feel it, first with his fingers, then with his tongue. He dug until he had a hole that was about as deep as his arm was long. There was enough water for him to scoop out with his hands and drop on Zero's face. Zero's eyes remained closed, but his tongue poked out between his lips, searching out the droplets. Stanley dragged Zero closer to the hole he dug, then scooped some more water and let it pour out of his hands into Zero's mouth. As he continued to widen his hole, his hand came across a mouth-round object. It was too smooth and too round to be a rock. He wiped the dirt off of it and realized it was an onion. He bit into it without peeling it. The hot, bitter juice burst into his mouth. He could feel it all the way up to his eyes. And when he swallowed, he felt his warmth move down his throat and to his stomach. He only ate half, and he gave the other half to Zero. Here, eat this. What is it? Zero whispered. A hot fudge sundae. Chapter 39. Stanley awoke in a meadow, looking up at the giant rock tower. It was layered and hang on. Stanley awoke in the meadow, looking up at the giant rock tower. It was layered and streaked with different shades of red, burnt orange, brown, and tan. It must have been over 100 feet tall. Stanley lay a while just looking at it. He didn't have the strength to get up. It felt like the inside of his mouth and throat were coated with sand. And no wonder. When he rolled over, he saw the water hole. It was about 2.5 feet deep and over 3 feet wide, as the bottom lay no more than 2 inches of very brown water. His hands and fingers were sore from digging, especially under his fingernails. He scooped some dirty water into his mouth and swished it around, trying to filter it with his teeth. Zero moaned. if only the woodpecker sighs that the bark on the tree was just a little bit softer. While the wolf waits below, hungry and lonely, he cries the moon. He cries to the moon. If only, if only. And that is all that we're going to read today. So I hope you all like this reading and will want to see more in tomorrow's video. That'll be going up on the 23rd of January. So I hope y'all will be back, and thank you for enjoying the reading of Holes by Sachar. Thank you for those that are watching on YouTube, and if you're listening to this on podcast, thank you so much. And I will see y'all back in another reading, starting with chapter 40. Basketball 2, Browning 7, Megan out. Peace out.